So guys, this is the second video in a 3-video series about vegetable garden beds, raised beds specifically, and that's the way I grow all my vegetables, either in containers or raised beds. But there's some really simple mistakes we all can make, and I've even made one this year that I'm going to talk about first. But it will help your vegetable garden be a much bigger success if you'll follow these guidelines. Now, if you didn't see the first video, I'll link it right here because this is video 2 in like I said, a 3-part series. So let's go out to the vegetable garden and I'll show you the first mistake that I made even after 30 years of gardening, almost 30 years of gardening on this property, that I should have known better than to follow this rule that I didn't. Now, the first mistake I'm going to talk about is a very common beginner mistake, and I should have known better because Mother Nature had fooled me this year into thinking that spring had arrived. But we had started getting some really mild weather in early April. I put all of these tomatoes out of the greenhouse way too early, and we had some cold nights. They weren't freezing nights, but they were cold enough to do a little bit of damage. I'm going to show you an example on one tomato plant. I still see a stem or a branch that's in really bad shape. But anyways, that's rule number 1 in this second series, is don't put out too early. Look online and put last frost date and then Google it. You'll find a page come up where you can enter your zip code or your town or city name, and then it'll tell you what your estimated last frost date for your area is. It's really critical that you don't spend a lot of time, energy, effort, or even money putting out your vegetables only to find out they've all been killed overnight by late season frost. Now, as I said, these are looking okay. There's 8 plants here. They're all tomatoes of, I believe, the same variety in this particular bed. But if you look at that branch at the bottom, it's definitely been damaged by cold. It wasn't disease, it wasn't underwatering, it wasn't overwatering. It was just making the mistake of not checking the last frost date and sticking to that rule. So remember, it'll save you a lot of time, energy, and effort if you'll make sure you know your estimated last frost date. Now, this next one is a biggie, and I was guilty of this in the beginning, but I've learned through trial and error that you need to know exactly the type of plants you planted, and that's where labels come in. These labels are absolutely free. You can just stick them in the ground, write in a big black magic marker exactly what type of plant it is, whether tomato or cucumber, and these are paint sticks. You can get them at your local hardware store. Each time you go in, just grab a handful. They give these away. There's no charge for them, or you could go to a craft store, use popsicle sticks. A lot of garden centers will sell these small plastic plant labels. I've got some somewhere around the greenhouse that I use this little flower stand that belonged to my wife. I can label it, and it's a little metal tag that hangs from it. So labeling the plants is extremely critical if you want to make sure that you can remember exactly what went wrong with a specific plant. So write down at the end of season how it performed, how much yield you had, and so remember that labeling is critical. So guys, failing to grow vertically is another critical mistake a lot of beginners make. You want to have as much yield as you can in growing up instead of trying to let it spread across the ground. You'll be much happier with the results, less chance of diseases getting to your plants by having them growing vertically, not having a lot of things touching the ground where diseases and a lot of things can just splash back onto it. So remember, failing to do vertical gardening is another critical mistake. You want to go up, not horizontal. Maybe I'll get those 2 words right eventually. So guys, the next big thing that most beginner mistakes are not planning for the future. As you can see, I've definitely planned for the future with this garden, but my first several attempts at vegetable gardening, I was in a much smaller place, same property, but I just allocated only a small amount of ground to growing vegetables. So what I want to say is, if you want to plan for the future, always think you're going to want to double or even triple the size of your vegetable garden. So something like this, I should be able to produce more vegetables than I could eat maybe in 2 or 3 years. Now, one thing that I add to the vegetable garden each year is a bag or 2 or maybe even 3 to each 4x8 bed of black cow composted manure. But if you make the mistake of adding raw manure that hasn't been aged and it hasn't been composted, you're taking a huge chance on burning everything in your garden. So remember, you want to use composted manure. Black Cow is my favorite brand because it's easy and accessible. I don't know a farmer offhand that would be able to sell me that in my area. So just remember, Black Cow or some type of composted manure is critical. Don't put raw manure, fresh manure on your vegetable garden. You'll absolutely burn it, or I'm almost sure you will. So the next beginner mistake is not testing your soil pH. Now this is one of the newer pH testers I have, and it's got metal probe on the back, and you stick it in there. It can kind of give you an estimated, probably not perfect, but pretty close of what your actual pH is. This rather antique looking one I've had for over 25 years, this pH tester. And that's one thing that you need to know. The plant you're planting, what its pH requirements are, and what the actual pH of your soil is. So you want to make sure that you've combined those two so they're both compatible together, plant and soil. If not, you can use sulfur or lime to adjust the pH. So just remember, doing a little bit of investigation will make that plant so much healthier and so much happier in your garden and so much more produce. Now, raised vegetable beds are going to drain a lot quicker than your standard soil, especially if you have clay soil. If you have sandy soil, then your soil will drain extremely quickly, but that's kind of a rarity. Most people have somewhere a mix therein. But you want to make sure that in peak weather, this is a critical mistake that a lot of beginners create because the summer gets hot, they get kind of tired of watering their garden. But once peak heat comes in, you may have to be watering every day. Again, those pH meters, a lot of them will also test for soil moisture. You can also stick your finger and just go down about 3 or 4 inches, and if it feels dry, it's dry, because that is where it's going to dry out first. So just remember, daily watering may become necessary, and I've got some videos about installing, I believe, if I've got it, I'll put it up here, but installing one on your tap about watering, or a micro irrigation system, so you don't have to put so much work into watering your garden, especially if you have a full-time job, career, and you just don't have time to deal with it. So having those automated systems in place will save your plants and will keep them from getting weak and diseases from moving in on your plants. Now, the other side of that coin about underwatering is overwatering. If you're at the beginning of the season and you're afraid that your plants are going to dry out, your vegetables are going to dry out and die, then you might be tempted to water every day. The best watering the schedule in the beginning, once they've become established, once your seedlings have become established, is probably 2 to 3 times a week, and doing deep waterings and allow the soil to dry out just a little bit in between watering. So just remember that overwatering can lead to root rot, and you can lose plants very quickly by overwatering. Now, I believe that crop rotation has been around for over 100 years. It was discovered, I believe, in the Southeast. I could be mistaken there, but moving your crops from different beds. If you're planting tomatoes in the same bed every year, you're making a mistake, because diseases can build up in the soil. Certain nutrients can be drained because you're using the same plant in the same bed each year. So just rotating the crops and just trying different spots in the garden, that's really critical, is crop rotation, and a lot of beginners never think about that from year to year. Now, this is something that I don't always do because there's not a lot of room in 4x8 beds, but if you've got enough room to do companion planting, some plants, vegetables make good companions, and then some make kind of bad, like onions and beans don't go well together. So just remember that you want to do a little bit of research. I'll try to remember to make a list on the good and the bad plants, vegetables that make good companions, and the ones that make bad companions. So I'll put that on full screen so you can pause it, freeze it, do a screenshot, and you'll know which works best together and which works not so good together. So guys, this was part 2 of a 3-part series about beginner mistakes in raised vegetable beds. And you don't necessarily have to be a beginner gardener, but if you're putting together raised beds in your garden, you want to follow these principles to have the highest success rate in growing vegetables or anything else you might be wanting to grow in raised beds. It's not only limited to vegetables. You could be planting something like berries or any type of trees, shrubs, anything that might grow edibles as well. So guys, if you have questions about this video or any previous video, please become a public subscriber first. I tend to put those people to the front of the line so I can answer their questions first. I have trouble with, I have so many comments coming in and so many questions, it's hard for me to keep track of it even when we're talking about subscribers, but I do put you as a priority and want to give you the most accurate and honest answer possible. So guys, I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.